Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm 74 and I've always tried to be a good father. My wife and I worked hard to give our daughter a comfortable life. We're not rich, but we've done alright. I'm an accountant and my wife's a teacher. We've always emphasized the importance of education and hard work. Our daughter seemed to be on the right track. She was smart, got good grades in high school, and got into a decent college. We were proud of her. We paid for her tuition, her books, even her living expenses. She had a part-time job at a local coffee shop, but that was just for her own spending money. We wanted her to focus on her studies. Everything seemed fine until that night when I got the call from the police station. My daughter arrested for breaking and entering. It had to be a mistake, but it wasn't. I rushed to the station. And when I saw her in that holding cell, it hit me like a ton of bricks. This was real. She looked scared, but there was something else in her eyes. Defiance? Anger? I couldn't tell. I asked her what happened and what she was thinking. She responded defensively, saying I didn't understand and that it wasn't what I thought. I expressed my disbelief, mentioning that she was caught on camera breaking into someone's house. She tried to justify her actions, claiming they were just having fun and that the rich people they stole from wouldn't even miss what they took. This wasn't how we raised her. I scolded her, saying that breaking the law isn't fun and that she could have been shot. She dismissed my concern and demanded that I get her out of there, suggesting I call my lawyer friends. I explained that it wasn't that simple, and she lashed out, accusing me of being a bad father for not helping her. Her words stung, but I knew I couldn't make this go away. We got her a good lawyer, the best we could afford, but the evidence was overwhelming. Multiple break-ins, all caught on camera. The prosecutor wasn't interested in cutting any deals. As the days went by, the reality of the situation sank in. She was going to have to plead guilty. There was no other choice, but instead of accepting responsibility, she lashed out at us. She blamed us for not giving her enough money, claiming that if we had, she wouldn't have had to steal. I reminded her that we had given her everything she needed and that she had no reason to steal. She argued that she was tired of being the poor kid compared to her peers with designer stuff and fancy cars. I expressed my disappointment that she chose to become a criminal instead. She demanded that I protect her and make the situation disappear. I explained that I couldn't make it go away and that she had to face the repercussions. She responded with hurtful words, claiming that I was the worst father ever. Her words cut deep, but I knew I couldn't give in. She needed to understand the gravity of what she'd done. As the court date approached, I tried to talk some sense into her. I acknowledged that she was scared, but emphasized the need to take responsibility for her actions. She dismissed the severity of her crime, arguing that the rich people wouldn't miss what was taken and probably had insurance. I explained that it didn't make her actions right and that she had violated people's homes and sense of safety. She brushed off my words and demanded that I get her out of the situation. I sighed, realizing she still didn't get it. I reiterated that I couldn't just get her out of it. I reminded her that we had raised her better than this, and she accused me of lecturing her again and claimed that if I were a better father, I'd find a way to fix the situation. Her entitlement was shocking. Where had we gone wrong? The day of the sentencing arrived, and the judge looked sternly at my daughter and delivered a speech about how she had every opportunity to succeed in life but chose to prey on others instead. The judge noted her disturbing lack of empathy and sense of entitlement. My daughter rolled her eyes, which didn't go unnoticed by the judge. The judge acknowledged her lack of remorse and sentenced her to 3 years in state prison, with a possibility of parole after 18 months. Additionally, she was ordered to pay restitution to her victims. The gavel came down with a finality that shook me to my core. My daughter turned to me, blaming me for the situation, claiming that if I had been a better father, this wouldn't have happened. As they led her away, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Maybe this would be the wake-up call she needed. In the weeks that followed, I struggled with my emotions. Had I failed as a father? Should I have done more? But deep down, I knew that at some point our children have to take responsibility for their actions. My wife and I visited her in prison. It was hard seeing her there, but we knew we had to stand firm. We expressed our love for her, but made it clear that we couldn't fix the situation for her. We encouraged her to use this time to reflect on her choices and decide what kind of person she wanted to be when she got out. She responded with disbelief that we were allowing this to happen to her. My wife spoke up, clarifying that we weren't letting anything happen to her and that she had done this to herself. We assured her that we would be there to support her when she was ready to make better choices. Maybe this would be the turning point she needed, but only time would tell. I'm a single dad trying my best to juggle work and raising my 6-year-old son. My job allows me to work from home most days, which is a blessing, but it also means I'm constantly trying to find a balance between being productive and being present for my kid. That day I promised my son we'd go to the playground after I finished an important video call. He'd been cooped up inside all day, patiently waiting while I worked, so I knew he was bursting with energy. As soon as my call ended, we headed out to the local park. The playground was busy as usual. Kids were running around, laughing, and playing on various equipment. My son immediately made a beeline for the swings, his favorite. There were 2 swings and both were occupied when we got there. My son, being the polite kid he is, waited his turn. After a few minutes, one of the kids got off and my son hopped on, his face lighting up with joy. I stood nearby keeping an eye on him while also answering a few quick work emails on my phone. Everything seemed normal and peaceful. That's when I noticed her, a woman standing near the other swing, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. She kept looking at her watch, then at my son, then at me. I didn't think much of it at first, but after about 5 minutes, she marched over to me. The woman rudely asked how long my kid was going to hog the swing. Confused, I asked her to clarify, and she impatiently explained that her daughter had been waiting for ages and it was her turn now. I looked around bewildered as I hadn't seen any child waiting for the swings. The only other kid on the swings was a little girl who'd been there since before we arrived. I politely explained that my son had just gotten on a swing a few minutes ago and that I didn't see anyone waiting. The woman angrily pointed to the little girl on the other swing, accusing me of being blind. I calmly pointed out that the little girl she was referring to had been on the swing since before we arrived and didn't seem to want to get off. The woman became more agitated, insisting that I shouldn't tell her what her daughter wants. She claimed her daughter had been asking to switch to the other swing for the past 10 minutes. At this point, I was getting irritated. I firmly stated that I had been standing there the whole time and her daughter hadn't said a word. I suggested that if her daughter wanted to switch swings, she could ask my son, but I reminded her that he had just gotten on and was allowed to play too. The woman then accused me of discriminating against her child. I questioned how I could be discriminating when all the kids were just playing. She threatened to call the police, which I initially thought was a joke, and to my shock, she actually pulled out her phone and started dialing. I expressed my disbelief that she was calling the police because my son was on a swing. She ignored me and began talking into her phone, using phrases like threatening behavior and endangering children. I was wondering what this woman was doing. I called my son over, not wanting him to be part of whatever was about to unfold. He came reluctantly, confused about why he had to stop playing. I reassured him that he hadn't done anything wrong and that we just needed to wait for a bit. About 10 minutes later, we heard sirens. 3 police cruisers pulled up to the park, lights flashing. Officers jumped out, looking around urgently. One of them approached us, hand on his holster. My son clutched my leg, scared by all the commotion. The officer instructed me to step away from the child and put my hands where he could see them. I complied, explaining that there had been a huge misunderstanding and that I was the boy's father and hadn't threatened anyone. The woman rushed over, pointing at me accusingly and identifying me as a man who had been harassing them. The other parents at the playground watched in shock, probably wondering what horrible thing I had done to warrant this response. The officer asked me to explain what was going on. I took a deep breath and calmly recounted the events, explaining that I had brought my son to the playground after work and he was playing on a swing when this woman demanded he get off. When I refused, she threatened to call the police, which I thought was a bluff. The officer looked skeptical but nodded. He turned to the woman and asked if my account was true and if she had called them because of a dispute over the swings. The woman started to deny it but seemed to falter, realizing perhaps that her lie was about to unravel. The officer warned her about the seriousness of making a false report and asked her to tell him exactly what happened. As the woman stammered, trying to come up with a convincing story, another parent approached the officer. The parent offered their eyewitness account, confirming that I was telling the truth. They explained that my son was just playing on a swing when the woman started causing trouble, and she was the one who was yelling and making threats. The officer's demeanor changed immediately. He turned back to the woman, his expression now stern. He instructed her to come with him, stating that they needed to have a serious discussion about the implications of making false reports to the police. The woman protested, claiming she was a victim and that the situation wasn't fair. The officer firmly asked her not to make the situation more difficult than it needed to be. As the officer led the protesting woman away, another officer approached me, looking apologetic. He expressed regret for the disturbance, explaining that they take all the calls about child safety seriously, but it seemed they were misled in this case. He asked if my son and I were okay. I assured him that we were shaken up but okay and thanked him for handling the situation professionally. After the officers left, I knelt down to my son's level, giving him a big hug. I asked him if he was okay and he said he thought so. He then asked why the lady had lied. I sighed, trying to find the right words to explain such bizarre adult behavior to a 6-year-old. I told him that sometimes people do strange things when they don't get what they want, but emphasized the importance of always trying to be honest and kind. My son then asked if we could go home, and I agreed, suggesting we stop for ice cream on the way. Despite everything, I was proud of how my son had handled himself. He hadn't thrown a tantrum or gotten scared. Well, not until the police showed up anyway. He'd been polite and patient throughout the whole ordeal. Maybe I was doing something right in this whole parenting gig after all. When I lost my job at the factory where I'd worked for 15 years, the company was downsizing, and suddenly I found myself was at a steady income. I tried to keep up with rent and bills, but it wasn't long before I fell behind. My landlord was in the understanding type, but before I knew it, I was evicted from my small apartment. With nowhere else to go and no family to turn to, I ended up on the streets. It was rough, to say the least. I spent nights in shelters when I could, but often found myself huddled in alleyways and parks, trying to stay warm and dry. For a while I thought things couldn't get any worse, but then I caught a break. I managed to land a part-time job at a local convenience store. It wasn't much, but it was a start. With that glimmer of hope, I decided to make a change. I packed up what little I had and headed north, hoping for a fresh start. That's how I ended up here, living deep in the woods. It's not ideal, but it's peaceful. I set up a small camp hidden away from any hiking trails. I've got my tent, a sleeping bag, and a few basic supplies. It's not much, but it's mine. The biggest challenge is staying connected to the world. I needed to keep my phone charged and access the internet to look for better job opportunities and keep in touch with my new employer. That's where the library comes in. It's become my lifeline. The day started like any other day. I made my way into town and headed straight for the library. I found a quiet corner, plugged in my phone and battery banks, and settled in for a couple of hours of job searching and catching up on emails. Everything was going fine until it was time to leave. I bent down under the desk to unplug my battery banks, and that's when all hell broke loose. A woman suddenly started yelling, accusing me of doing something I shouldn't. Before I could even respond, she rushed over to the librarian desk, loudly claiming that I was stealing the computer. I stood there completely stunned and I could feel everyone's eyes on me. The woman marched back over, practically dragging the librarian with her. The librarian calmly asked what I was doing, and I stammered out an explanation, saying that I was just unplugging my power bank. I held up the 4 battery banks in my hands, hoping they would understand. The librarian looked relieved, but the woman wasn't backing down. She insisted that I must have been trying to steal something because I was under the desk. I tried to explain that I come to a library regularly to use the internet and charge my devices. The woman scoffed at my explanation, questioning why I would need to charge so many things and accusing me of probably selling stolen goods. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and anger. I looked at the librarian, silently pleading for help. The librarian tried to defuse the situation, explaining that I was a regular patron and hadn't done anything wrong. The woman, however, insisted that I looked suspicious and demanded that the librarian ban me from the library. That was the last straw. I've been trying to keep my composure, but I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted the woman, asking what her problem was and telling her she had no right to judge me or my situation. She retorted that she could recognize a criminal when she saw one. Frustrated and hurt, I opened up about my situation. I explained that I had lost my job in my home and that I was doing everything I could to get back on my feet. I told her that the library was the only place I could come to stay connected and look for work, and I asked her if she really wanted to take that away from me just because of how I looked. The woman's face went pale as the reality of the situation sank in. The librarian stepped in, her voice firm but kind. She suggested that the woman owed me an apology, explaining that I had done nothing wrong and that her assumptions had caused me unnecessary distress. The woman looked flustered, her earlier confidence crumbling. She stammered out an apology, admitting that she shouldn't have jumped to conclusions. I accepted her apology, but urged her to think before accusing someone in the future, explaining that she had no idea how much damage her words could do. As I gathered my things to leave, the librarian gently touched my arm. She reassured me that I was always welcome at the library and asked me not to let this incident discourage me from coming back. I nodded, grateful for her kindness. As I walked out, I heard the librarian addressing the woman again, suggesting they needed to have a conversation about making baseless accusations and respecting all of the library's patrons. And personally, I am not going to let one bad experience ruin the progress I've made. Tomorrow's another day, and I'll be back at that library working towards a better future. After losing my job in the city due to corporate downsizing, I couldn't afford my fancy studio anymore. So here I am living in a small town in a basement trying to piece my life back together. The couple I rent from seem nice enough. They are getting up there in years, probably in their late 50s or early 60s. No kids, just a big white fluff ball of a dog they call Doo-Doo. Now, I'm not much of a dog person, but even I can tell this Samoyed is spoiled rotten. The yard here is pretty decent, big and fenced in. You'd think Doodoo would love running around in it, but nope. That dog prefers to hang out by the driveway or occasionally dart into the woods. It's like having a whole playground and choosing to sit in a sandbox. Me, I've got a cat. He's an indoor cat, but I like to bring him out sometimes. It's our little routine. I keep an eye on him while I read a book, and he gets to explore a bit. It's nice, or at least it should be. But every single time, and I mean every time, we go outside, Doodoo decides the yard is suddenly the most interesting place in the world. And let me tell you, this dog has a mission. No matter where we are in the yard, Doodoo comes trotting over like she owns the place. She'll walk right up, take a leak, and then saunter away like she'd made her point. It's like dealing with a passive-aggressive roommate. Except this one has 4 legs and a tail. One day my cat was chilling in his favorite bush. He wandered off a bit, maybe about 20 feet away. Wouldn't you know it, Doodle saw her chance. That dog swooped in and took a massive dump right in my cat's special spot. That was the last straw. I'd had enough of this canine's territorial nonsense, so I hatched a plan. I gathered some of my cat's hair. He sheds enough that it wasn't hard. I sprinkled it all around the bush, but I didn't stop there. Oh no, I took it one step further. I peed right on top of the doo-doo's poop. Yeah, I know, it sounds crazy, but desperate times call for desperate measures, right? I waited to see what would happen. About half an hour later, Doo-Doo came into the yard. She made a beeline for the bush, just like I knew she would. But things was different. She started sniffing around, probably confused by the mixture of scents. Then she looked at me. I swear if a dog could look shocked, this was it. I stared right back at her, not blinking, channeling all my frustration into that look. In my mind, I was telling that furry menace that her reign of terror was ending now. Dudu whined softly in response, and I continued to stare, silently willing her to leave. You know what? She did. That dog tucked her tail between her legs and slunk away, head down like she'd been scolded. I couldn't believe it worked. I half expected the owners to come storming down demanding to know why their precious Dudu was so upset. But nothing happened. The next day I brought my cat out again, half expecting Dudu to come charging in for round two. But she didn't. She stayed by the driveway, occasionally looking our way but never coming close. From the porch, I heard the owner calling out to Dudu, asking if she wanted to play in the yard. Dudu just whined and stayed put. The owner then remarked to me how odd it was, as Dudu usually loves the yard when we're out there. I just shrugged innocently, suggesting that maybe she just wasn't in the mood today. This went on for days. Dudu would avoid the yard whenever we were out there. It was like she'd finally learned some boundaries. I almost felt bad. Almost. One afternoon, I was sitting outside with my cat when the female owner came over. She mentioned that she had noticed Dudu acting strange lately, refusing to go in the yard when we were there. She asked if I happened to know anything about that, and for a moment I considered telling her the truth. But then I remembered all those times Dudu had ruined our outdoor time. I feigned ignorance, suggesting that maybe Dudu was just giving us some space. The owner looked suspicious but didn't press further. To change the subject, I asked if it would be okay for me to plant some catnip in the bush my cat likes. The owner seemed surprised by the request but agreed, mentioning that Dudu never goes near that bush anyway. Not only had I reclaimed the yard, but now I had permission to make it even better for my cat. As the owner walked away, I looked over at Dudu still sulking by the driveway. I quietly remarked that it seems we both learned something about respecting boundaries. Dudu just whined and looked away. From that day on, my cat and I enjoyed our time in the yard in peace. And if Dudu ever got any ideas about reclaiming her territory, well, let's just say I kept a little bag of cat hair handy, just in case.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.